that sense of nuance. Anybody who's really grappled with your work is familiar with it, the reversals. And I love that, the being formless, the 48th law, it kind of brings everything together. And it's funny because you're often mistakenly, in my opinion, thought of only as this Machiavellian writer about power or war, or seduction, just these like sort of tactical, strategic angles. But you've written two other books that include a much broader set of perspectives, Mastery and the Laws of Human Nature, that we talked about a little bit. And maybe one of the reasons that the nuance and depth in your work is less talked about is because it's much harder to contain in a kind of a quick byline, right? Whereas when we talk, we just say Machiavelli for the modern times, it just kind of jumps off the page, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about mastery and some of the lessons of the laws of human nature. In the book, you mentioned that the first step to mastery is to discover your life's task. You write that what we lack most in the modern world is a sense of a larger purpose. And so in order to master a field, you must love the subject and feel a profound connection to it. Your interest must transcend the field itself and border on the religious. So first, why is it you think that we lack a sense of purpose in modern life? And how can we go about finding our life's task if the very notion of a religious level interest seems almost distant for a lot of people today, right? We see more as a culture focused on immediate things like work and paying the bills and, I don't know, watching Netflix, social media. How do we get to that quasi-religious state if that's not what we're taught to value in the culture?
Okay. What was the first part of the question? I'm sorry.
It was, why do we lack a sense of purpose in modern life?
Well, a lot of it has to do with something embedded in human nature. And I talk about that in both in Mastery and in the Laws of Human Nature in the chapter on aimlessness, where, if you're an animal, if you're a cat, a dog, a tiger, you don't wake up in the morning and go, what am I going to do today? Where am I going to find mice to kill? How am I going to, et cetera, et cetera. You basically programmed by your instinct, by certain, things that you don't have to sit there and figure out, what am I going to do? We are born differently. We don't operate on instinct. We have instincts for sure, but they don't govern most of our behavior anymore, right? So you wake up in the morning, you don't have a direction. You don't have somebody telling you, unless you have a job where you have to get somewhere, this is what you must do, this is what you must wear, this is what you must believe, this is where you must go, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we're born in a much different state than any other animal, in a way that evolution had never prepared for it in all of its millions of years of preparing for the evolution of humans. Okay? And so you arrive at a moment where you could be very lost, and it's easy to get lost. But if you compare this to the past, it wasn't so egregious in the past. So you had direction, you had social codes, you had, this is what you're supposed to do. This is how you're supposed to behave. If you're born into this class, if you're born into this ethnicity, if you have this profession and this career, things were kind of spelled out for you. And even not so long ago, I remember my father, God bless him, he worked his whole life, basically 50 years, at one job, at one company, right? So he had a pretty much programmed life, even though he had a rich life in his own way. Nobody does that anymore. Nobody works at the same company for more than a few years. Usually, I never worked at one place more than 11 months. So when you have that situation where you have the internet, where you have all this information, all this possibility, I could go here, I could do this, I could do that, I could do that, I could learn this skill, I could learn that. You're lost, right? It's like I sometimes go to the supermarket and I go, damn, I wish somebody would just choose for me. I can't choose between all of these different brands. It's overwhelming. Well, the internet is like this market. It's just like confusing and driving you crazy because there's too much choice. You have too much choice in your life. And so it's very easy to get lost and to let that aimlessness overwhelm you like a wave and just send you off in some direction that you never intended to go. And so when you're in your 20s, you have energy, you look good, you're excited, you dress well, etc. you kind of cover up that fact of being aimless, right? You can have fun, you can work, be a barista, you can go travel to Finland, you can take a van, all blah, 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 and you get away with it. But then suddenly you're 30 years old, you have no real skill base, you never really thought about it, and you're not so young, you don't look quite as good, you don't dress quite as well, you're not as hip as you used to be. Well, shit, what am I going to do, man? I am lost. It's a terrible, terrible feeling. So that's why it's so dangerous for humans. To get to the second part of your question, you have to understand something very fundamental about the human brain that you were born with. And a lot of mastery is about understanding how our brains and our neurology. All right? And it's very simple. When you're excited by something, when you want to learn a subject, you're going to learn 10 times faster than if you're bored with it, because you're paying attention, you're paying deep attention. Things are getting into your brain, you're learning, you're retaining it. Whereas if you're bored, you never retain anything. So I remember two things. When I was trying to graduate from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, I had one class I had to finish, which was in science, because I never really took many science classes. It was in pharmacology. I had to learn all these drug names, et cetera, et cetera. I crammed like crazy. It was like an intense 3-month class, and I got an A from it. I can't remember one thing to this day about anything from that class. Not one thing. I've retained nothing, right? Okay. And the other example was I studied French in the university, and I thought it was pretty good. I studied for a couple of years because I loved languages. And then I went to Paris when I was 22 years old, and I wanted to live there. I couldn't understand a word. My university education was useless because I had no reason to learn. But once I was in Paris and I fell in love with this very beautiful Parisian girl, damn, I gotta learn French. I'm not gonna be able to have any I won't be able to talk to her, for God's sake. How can I ask her for a date if I can't say anything? If I can't order on a menu, if I blah, blah, blah. I learned more French in 3 weeks than I learned in 3 years of university because I wanted to. So when you want to learn something, doors open up in the brain, things come in, you retain them, and you learn at an incredibly fast rate. All right? So if you choose a career that doesn't excite you, that doesn't hit you, that doesn't connect you, which is the case for most people, I'm afraid, that you're never going to really learn. You're never going to be able. Learning is a function both of what you absorb and the intensity of the absorption. And what I mean by that is, if you spend 2 years learning something very intensely, you're going to go much further than if you learned the same amount in 5 or 10 years, right? Because the brain makes all kinds of connections between things with the intensity of focus. Things you develop a momentum that I talk about in mastery. All right. So the game is, if you want power, if you want success, if you want to be a master in this world, you have to choose a career that you emotionally connect to, so that you can access that part of the brain that was developed for learning because you were emotionally engaged. So that
gives you that fuel to go further, to create more connections, you have a lot more engagement.
Right. So the earlier you can understand that, the more deeply you understand what it was you were meant to do in life. If you can connect to what I call your primal inclinations, what separated you, what you were excited about when you were 2 years old, 3 years old, etc. And I have many historic examples of people who became very successful, who had those moments when they were almost infants. You're going to be able to figure it out earlier on. And you're going to go through that process, that accelerated learning process in your teens, in your early 20s. And you're going to be called a child prodigy. You're going to be a boy or girl wonder, And I give example after example after example of this. So the most important thing in life is figuring that out, is knowing what you were meant to do in life, to know what your destiny is.
And this reminds me of something I read also in The Laws of Human Nature, when you wrote, there are no superior callings, right? People tend to start by saying, okay, is there a path to fame? Is there a path to entrepreneurship? Is there a path to making it really, really big? And you're right. What matters is that your calling be tied to a personal need and inclination, and that your energy moves you toward improvement and continuous learning. No calling is superior to another. So it kind of echoes with what you're saying now about start with something that you're really, really passionate about, that you're really engaged with, and let that be your sort of North Star.
Yeah, I mean, there's a book that I recommend to a lot of people. It's by a man named Howard Gardner. It's called The Five Frames of Mind. I believe, I don't remember the last word. I think it's called The Five Frames of Mind.
Howard Gardner, is he the psychologist that wrote about the theory of multiple intelligences?
Yes, that's what this is about. It's about the 5 forms of intelligences. So I don't have them all 5 memorized, I'm sorry, but there's obviously mathematical numbers, kind of that sort of abstract reasoning. There's words and linguistics. There's kinetics. It's like body movement, etc.
The body, yeah.
There's social intelligence. And there's something else, I can't remember what it is.
I believe he has musical intelligence too. Like some people are just really brilliant at music, and it's not necessarily like more rational or more, skilled at even like writing, but like music just really makes sense to them.
Well, he also does something even more basic. I think it's about like being able to know patterns, that you're obsessed with patterns. And music is all about creating certain kind of patterns. And so there's deep below the level of actually being good at music, there's something going on in the brain. And if you can say the brain has these inclinations, we all basically have the same brain, the same design, but there's just little differences that create a bend in that mind, an inclination to your spirit. And those are the 5 frames that he talks about. You inevitably are bent towards one of them, right? That's just every single human being has that.
Yeah.
And you need to know what that is, right? So for me, it was words, it was linguistics. I was obsessed with language when I was 5 years old. I can recall things in elementary school. Whoa. And I just loved looking things up in a dictionary. Well, that was a sign of what I was meant to do. And if I had followed my parents' advice and went to law school and become a lawyer or become a doctor, I'd probably have cancer by now or have died from a heart attack or something.
Well, law does, as a fellow linguistic sort of obsessed person, it does give you a bit of an outlet towards that, the reading, the writing, the playing with words. But if you have a strong creative side, you're always going to be sort of hitting your head against the wall.
That's true. If you're like a defense lawyer, if you're in court, you're able to like kind of give your final summation or something. There's some interesting writing involved in that, and writing briefs, et cetera. Yeah, but it's a little bit constricting, It wasn't. It wasn't my world. Anyway, you have one of those bets, one of those inclinations. The game is understanding what that is, right? And nothing is superior to another. So one of the skills, one of the forms of intelligence is working with your hands. It's something that's very degraded in the world today, right? We don't really respect people who just make things with their hands, a carpenter or a craftsman. But in the past, that was considered one of the highest forms of human intelligence. And it's where, as a species, we evolved, was our hand-eye coordination, our ability to make tools. That's who we are. Well, I had a carpenter here at the house who made the tiles for my patio. He was a master at it. He was brilliant. He could just figure things out. And so working with your hands, building something, making something beautiful is a form of intelligence. It's not any less of an intelligence than what Elon Musk or Albert Einstein or James Joyce creates. It's just as beautiful, just as human, just as sublime as anything else. I don't have any kind of hierarchy among them. The hierarchy is those who figure it out and those who never figure it out. If you never figure it out, you're never going to go very far in this world, I'm afraid.